Hello and welcome to another Daily Devo. My name is Mr. Brussel. It's a blessing to be with you again today. Hey, I want to start us off today with a short story. It's a true story that happened to me in high school. It was the last period of the day, and I was sitting in class. I remember looking outside and seeing the sunshine and just wanting to get back on the road back home. And I looked at the clock and I see that we still have 45 minutes left in this period. Now in German class, that seemed like an eternity. But I will start off my daydream by the words of my German teacher. In her thick German accent, she announced that today we were having a listening test. I need to give you a little bit of a backstory. German was not my strongest subject. We were required to take it, and looking back, I still have no idea how in the world I made it through 2 full years of German class. I actually recall seeing a 2-point something on my report card at some point. Anyways, we have this listening test, and I needed to listen to a German radio show and then write down a summary. So I go ahead and do that, and as soon as I was done, my teacher called on me to get up in front of the class and read my short essay. So I get up and with full confidence, I read my summary about how the radio show talked about a German motorcycle gang that was terrorizing small towns in Germany. Now I sit back down, only to find out that I was totally wrong. The German radio show I listened to was a cooking show. It had nothing to do with motorcycles or gangs or anything scary at all. Hey, today Paul is going to encourage the church in Corinthians not to stick each other into a spiritual German class. He's going to challenge them to create an environment for maximal spiritual encouragement. And it all boils down to a principle that we've seen in action throughout this book. No one runs solo in the Christian life. And hopefully you had a chance to read our passage for today, which can be found in 1 Corinthians 14, verse 10 through 17. If not, just hit pause on this video and tune back in whenever you're done. After reading this passage, you might be thinking, does this even apply to me? Now, Matt and Joe and the rest of the guys have done a great job explaining why we can't actually pursue the spiritual gift of speaking in tongues anymore. It's something that has passed. And so, is this still an applicable passage for us today? And the answer is absolutely. The principles of what we can apply from the basics of this passage are extremely necessary to do church and family and friendships God's way. And 1 Corinthians 14 is set up around 2 summary statements by Paul. And they can function as the tent poles between which the rest of the content is strung. We'll read the first tent pole, the first summary statement in verse 12. There Paul says, or writes, that the church needs to strive to excel in building up the church. God desires his church to be built up and to be unified. This follows God's character. God is a God of order, peace, and unity. Those that follow his commandments experience that same order, peace, and unity as in line with his character. The second summary statement affirms the first, but becomes more specific, more personal. Where verse 12 argued for the church to be built up, in verse 17 Paul approaches the same topic from the negative. He says that we must be careful that other persons are not built up. So God is deeply interested in the Corinthian churches building up of the whole body of believers, and then building up the individual members of people that are in there. Now the Corinthian church was not doing that. In the verses between our summary statements, we read about people speaking in tongues, but apparently they were doing this in a way so that the people didn't understand what they were saying, were feeling left out, and didn't have the right environment to grow spiritually. Their church had become a lot like my German listening test. And Paul argues that there's no added value to this practice, especially when we see that in the light of the purpose of spiritual gifts, to build up the church and the individual members in them. Now, there have been some Christian pastors and teachers that have looked at this passage and said, look, here's a command to use very simple language when talking about spiritual things. Now, although there might be nothing wrong with that, that is not the main idea of Paul's plea. There's a deeper principle at play here. Paul desires that the Corinthian church demonstrates unity and building up one another. But here's the catch. Building up one another doesn't just happen by accident. I've never heard of a builder that threw some bricks together and boom, there's this house. No, our building up of others needs to be intentional and even planned. Carelessness leads to disruptive speaking and the tongue issue described in 1 Corinthians 14. We want to avoid people feeling left out or discouraged or even estranged in the family of God. So let's choose to carefully build up those around us. As we do that, we can trust that this will lead to unity in our churches, our friendships, and even our families. So for today, here's a challenge for us. Let's think of someone that's just a little bit hard to love. Maybe a parent, a classmate, a sibling, or even a friend. And let's choose to intentionally build them a plan for it, work towards that. And perhaps even answer this question: what can I do today to best show Christ's love to those around me?